Today I am going to start a new series of AWS DevOps. So I am starting with the AWS VPC concepts. Before going deep into VPC, you should also have some basic idea of IP addressing. You should know what are IP addresses, what are the classes, what are prefixes, how subnet is working. You can divide your sub networks into different subnets. You should know how routing is working, how you can connect the different networks uh, in your on-prem environment, how network address translation is working. Normally, we are using in our home, normally, internet routers are using the network address translation concept. So this is mandatory. The port address translation, if you want to host some local server to public reachable. So port address translation concept is very imperative, and the concepts of firewalls. So these are the basic concepts that you should know before going to understand the deep dive concept of AWS VPC. So if you are not good with these concepts, you cannot understand the VPC. You can set up the VPC, but you will not work just like an engineer. So I will recommend to be master all at least in these concepts. So now we have to understand in AWS VPC these nine core concepts. If you understand these nine core concepts, you will get the very perfect idea how VPC is working in AWS environment, how they design this, and how our traffic flow is happening in AWS cloud. So the very first thing is the instance, that is the EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute. EC2, we must have to understand this is just like a virtual machine. Then the security groups associated with the EC2, the public subnets, the private subnets, route table, NAT gateways, internet gateway, network access control list, and elastic IPs. So in these videos, I will explain you all these concepts in detail. So what I did, I just created an account on AWS. How I created this account, this is not a difficult job. You can get a lot of videos on YouTube. But my target is to just focus on those core concepts that are normally not discussed uh, online and are not discussed in depth. So I just created an account. You can create this account. You just need a credit card. And there is one more concept to manage the identity and access management. I will definitely do a session on IAM, but today we have to understand the uh, VPC concept. So VPC is virtual private cloud, and I just created an account. I logged in as a root user. It is not recommended to use a root user to set up this environment, but I will explain you these concepts, the IAM related, mean how you can provision a specific user to set up the resources. But I use this root user and I will set up the VPC. So what I did, I just go to the services and I selected, you can search here, the VPC. So first thing you have to understand that VPC is a resource that is work at a region level. Okay, so there are different resources in cloud which are working at region level, some working as availability zone level, some are working at global level. So VPC will work in a region level. So what I did, I just selected this US West North California. This is not a specific reason to use this region. You can use any region. That's not an issue. But I just selected this region. Okay. I click on VPC. By default, all the regions have a built-in VPC. VPC is a free of cost service. Some services will cost you, I will explain you in these video sessions, but by default, VPC and its IP addressing and subnetting, these are all free services. So by default, this VPC is created in any region. If you jump, specific VPC is created. You can delete this, but we will create our own VPC. So our target is to understand the concept of all these 9 uh, technology set that are tightly binded with VPC. So here I am going to create a new VPC. So VPC, I can create a simple VPC and VPC and more. I will recommend to use VPC and more because it will create some additional resources too that you must need while you are setting up the VPC. If you are going to just set up a VPC, only VPC, it will just create the limited resources. So to understand this, I draw a diagram. So here, these are all the concepts we have to understand in detail. So here, this blue line is a region of Amazon, any region it can be, and it contains this VPC. This VPC you will assign a subnet, just like I just decided to use 20.20.20.0/24. You know, this /24 mean it has 256 usable, 256 IPs, and in fact 254 usable IPs. And this whole subnet we have to provide to our VPC that will further be divided in the form of subnetting to uh, different availability zone in public and private subnets. So just think about you are going to create a VPC with some subnet ID, and you have to give a big subnet ID that will be sufficient for you to provide the IP addresses. I use this very small /24. Mostly in AWS, you will see they are using /16 because the /16 contains a lot of 2 to raise power 16 number of IPs you can allocate. But to clear the concept of subnetting and how they will divide these IPs into different workable areas in AWS VPC, it is very easy to understand. So I will recommend you to please use this smaller subnet so that you will get the idea how this is working. Okay, now I will set up VPC and more. So VPC and more is giving you a graphical view. If you see here, VPC, the name of the VPC, I will give something project VPC, I can say project 1. Okay, and this project is going to create a is going to create public and private subnets in 2 availability zones. Okay, uh, and the name of the availability zone is US West 1A and US West 1B. So you can do, if you are not clear about the concept of zones, so think like the region is just like a city, and there are different center within a city, different data centers within a city, and those data centers are interconnected with the dark fiber. Simple. So this is a city. You can say this is California is a location, and this California contains 2 data centers. Uh, So you can see here, if you go down, you can see here the number of availability zones are 2. But if you jump into different region, you will see more than 2 availability zones too. It depends on in how many data centers they created. But today we just have to understand the interconnectivity of VPC between different availability zones. So it is good. We can start with 2 zones. So here VPC and more. So I it is going to create in these 2 availability zones a public and private subnet. Both zones data centers will have a public and private subnet. So if I relate this concept with this diagram, so you can see this is a VPC, is a bigger subnet, and then this yellow dotted line is representing the availability zone 1. Okay, and in this availability zone 1, you can see this is a private subnet and this is a public subnet. Similarly, this is another zone, it is a private subnet, public subnet. Similarly, you can have a third zone, fourth zone, depends on the region whatever you selected, and you can create this public and private subnet. And I placed here this network switch here. You can see in each uh, availability zone, public and private subnet. It depends, maybe you would not like to create the private subnet, um, but to explain all the concept, we will create public and private subnet. We will discuss this why we need this public and private subnet, then you will get the better idea why we are using these 2 subnets. So each subnet will have a switch, and you can say this is a layer 4 type of switch. It can do routing, it can do netting, it can do petting, and it can provide you the IP, it can give you the DHCP, and it will also give you some DNS related functionalities. And you can see here what I did. This bigger subnet, what I gave to VPC, is divided into smaller parts, subnetted with /24, and these IPs are divided into the network IDs on each switch. So if you are good with the networking concept, you can better understand what I wrote here, this 0/24, 32/24. Okay, so this will be changed. I should use here min up to 32 and 65 to, I believe, 64 to 27, and then it will go up to uh, okay. So now you can see this subnet is divided into 4 different parts. So if I go to this VPC and more, I give the name of the project. So here I will give the bigger subnet, but I want to use 20.20.20.0. It's up to you. You can use any subnet. I'm using /24. So you can see here 256 IPs are available, and tenancy I will choose the default, and number of availability zone in this region are 2. I want to use both, and you can change the first availability zone, second availability zone, this does not matter. Number of public subnets, the number of public subnets to add your VPC. So each so public subnet, there will be the 2 public subnet created, as you can see here. The public subnet in one zone, availability zone, and public subnet in another availability zone. Similarly, private subnet in one zone and private subnet in another zone. And you can increase the number of private zones, and here it will give you all the subnetting done on based on the bigger subnet you give. So if you used 2, it will divide something like this. Okay, and if you are going to divide into 4, it will reduce the number of IPs in each zone, because we have limited number of IPs, and it will divide according to the your division. So I will use two, that is good. Each zone will have uh, a private subnet. And 1A, each zone has a private subnet and a public subnet. So we need two subnet each zone, so that's why it is divided into four. So we have two availability zone and four subnets. Now, here NAT gateways I'm not going to create, and VPC endpoint S3 gateways I'm not going to create. I will explain you in some other videos how this will work. So NAT gateway we will create manually, and the DNS options, enable DNS host name, enable DNS resolution, mean whenever some IP will be allocated by the DHCP of this network, that will create a DNS record to reach within the VPC and to reach from the internet access. So I will also explain you when we will set up this. So I will just click on the create video, but create VPC. But here you can see this private public subnet is pointing to uh, this routing table, and this routing table is then pointing to this internet gateway. So just forget about what is this right now. I will explain you in detail how these two routing table and gateway is working. And project one private, this is the just the routing table related to this private subnet. So you can see one thing you just have to understand, that this line is interconnecting all the subnets. It's mean these all subnets are routable to each other. They can connect with each other. Okay. So if we go to our diagram, so here you can see these are the four switches created, one with private, one with public, and they are divided. They will get this IP range, and DHCP will be running in these switches, and there is a route table attached with each network switch that is responsible to make the routing in between all these remaining three networks. So this route table and all these are interconnected. So this is within a data center. So these are physically connected, and these are different availability zone. They are connected with the dark fiber, but they have the connectivity, and this routing table is able to reach all these three switches. Similarly, each switch is able to reach other three switches by having the routing table. So now you get some better idea that how the network is working, how it is divided, how it will connect with each other. But still the open item is how this private subnet and public subnet is different, and what is this EC2 and security group. So I will just create this VPC, and you can see a lot of resources it is going to create. The VPC network, the DNS server, it's spin up within the VPC, uh, created four different subnet. It's subnetted, created the switches, create their routing table, place them in the relevant availability zone, created the internet gateway, routing table placed within each network switch, and then the routes are created to reach all these different subnets. Uh, Associate route table mean they can communicate with each other, and this is all related to routing table and verifying. So now our VPC is ready. Okay, so this is a overview page of our VPC. You can see this is the subnet, bigger CIDR, classless interdomain routing we use, and this is the ID of this VPC. And if I again go to the VPC, you can see this is the default one created by AWS, and this is our VPC. Okay, and if I go to the subnets, so here we can see initially these two subnets. This one and this one was created by AWS, but remaining these four are created by us. We just created with our VPC. And here, if you scroll, you can see the subnet associated with uh, each subnet ID of the network ID of each subnet, and the availability of IP addresses and in which zone it is available. Okay, and the remaining resources it will show you. So now we set up these virtual switches. Okay, with virtual switches, routable, everything is ready. So now, so far we have not created any EC2, any security group, any NAT gateway. Okay, now the next thing we have to understand, what is the difference between this public subnet and private subnet? So to understand this concept, I will go to EC2 resource. So EC2 is just a virtual machine. You can say some hypervisor is running in the cloud. It will provision to us the virtual machine with some network interface, and that network interface is going to connect with this subnet that we created, this network switch we created, and this virtual machine will go is going to connect some network cable with this switch to get the IP automatically. So here you can see there are no instance running. So if I click on the instances, so I can launch an instance. I will give the instance name just like server 1. I will give the instance name something meaningful, like what region and what zone I am going to, what availability zone I am going to allocate to this server. So if I go down here, I can see the network settings. I click on edit, and these are the two VPCs. This is the default one created by AWS. This one I created. I select this, and I will use this to allocate the subnet. So I have two regions, four subnets, two zones, four subnet, and for example, I am going to create it with the public subnet in 1A, West 1A. So the machine name I will give server West 1A, and it is public. I just give the meaningful name because later on we have to jump into different instances to clear the concept. Okay, so I gave this the name of this virtual instance. I will select Ubuntu, and it will give some information about this operating system that I will select to set up this as an operating system. This browse more AMIs, Amazon machine images. So in cloud, the pre-installed operating systems are available. You can select anyone. There are a lot of machine images are available. Some you can also find with pre-installed software, just like if you want to have some Microsoft SQL Server pre-installed in Windows, you can select such from here. But that's not a difficult job. You can do this. So here I am just using the Linux Ubuntu, and it will it is giving us the information here that Ubuntu, which version we want to use. The latest one is 24.04, and there are other versions also available, and I am going to use uh, the free tier eligible. Free tier, Amazon will give you some free odds and you can only select these free tier eligible with the uh, free odds available. If you select these, this will charge you straightforward. So I will not recommend to you to use this just for the learning purpose. So I am going to use this free tier. It will give us the SSD and with the SSD, and here the architecture 64-bit or ARM. ARM is just for you can say just the laptop based processor or mobile devices based processor. So if you are going to use some proper hardware from Amazon, you will use x86-64. So the username is Ubuntu. Okay, this is important to note here, because whatever operating system you will select, it contains a built-in super user that you will use to manage administration, do the administration of the operating system. So Ubuntu will be the user, and the instance type I will use T2 micro. Here again the free tier eligibility is there. It is very small, 1 CPU 1 GB RAM, just to clear the concept. And I will use T2 micro, and here the key pairs, I will create a key pair, and there are two types of key pair. One is usable with Linux, one is usable with Windows. So I am going to generate a key pair, uh, RSA based key pair. It will use to access this EC2 instance. So ppk I will generate. You can see here use with putty. This is a Windows tool, and I can type here the the name of this key, VPC key pair. Okay, so create key pair. It will generate the key pair and will automatically attach the public key within your machine, whatever you are going to provision, and it will give you the private key so that you can reach to that server without password. And here the network I already selected, and auto assign public IP. If you enable this, it will automatically assign the public IP. I don't want to assign this. I want to show you how elastic IPs are working. So firewall security, create security group. So security group is you can see in this diagram this EC2 instance I'm going to create, and this EC2 instance is protected by this security group. You can see this red dotted line. So this security group will provide us the basic layer 4 firewall to protect some ports to be reachable inside the EC2 instance from this network switch. So this is just a very small entry level of firewall configured, and its name is security group. So here the name of the security group you can define anyone, and later on you can see this security group is attached with this virtual instance. This is the name of the description of this security group. You can change this, and by default this security group will allow you to access the virtual instance by using SSH, and you know the port of SSH is port 22. So remember to if you must have to uh, know the idea of Linux administration too if you are going to work with a EC2 Linux based instance. Otherwise you can also use a Windows based instance. So if you are not familiar with the Linux administration, you can see my uh, Linux administration uh, videos on my YouTube channel. So SSH will be allowed. Later on, we will modify this, and 8 GB GP3 of hard drive will be attached. Okay, sim, very good. Everything is done. We just are going to create this instance, and this is created. I'm going to click back to the instances, and if you refresh here, you will see a new instance is running and still in the initializing process. It will take some time, and then you will see all the details associated with this virtual instance. So here we can see the IP is allocated 20.20.20.7. So this is a random IP provided by this instance wherever we created this instance, and we can see it is in the West 1A, and in the West 1A whatever network switch was available and whatever IP series were available, the from that specific IP series the IP is allocated. If you click on the networking, we can see this is the private IP associated with this machine. Public IP is not there so far because we have not allocated, and the availability zone is US West 1A. If we go to our VPC and subnet US West 1A, US West 1A, this subnet. I will only select this subnet, and here you can see this is a private, sorry, it is the public one. 1A, yes, US West 1A, this one. And here you can see its subnet is 20.20.20/28. It's mean this IP, very first usable IP is 20.20.21 dot up to 31/28 mean up to 31. So one of the IP from the same range is allocated to this machine. Okay, and it's mean this machine with this public subnet is connected with this switch, and switch gave the IP. Now this machine is ready. Let me refresh. So here you can see status check, 2 out of 2 check passes, and it is up and running. Now we have to access this machine, but we cannot access this machine until unless we are not going to assign any public IP. So this is only reachable within the AWS data center, but we are sitting outside the AWS data center. We have to reach there by using some public IP. So how I will assign the public IP? If we go down, we can see here the elastic IP. In the networking and security, this is elastic IP, or otherwise you can go in VPC section. There is also an elastic IP. These both are same. So select the elastic IP and action and allocate elastic IP. It will give us some public IP reachable. So this IP is allocated 546748.2. So this IP is allocated. And where this IP is allocated actually? So this IP is allocated at internet from this internet gateway. See, you can think this internet gateway just like a bigger router that is sitting at the edge of this VPC, that is responsible to take all the traffic in and out from this VPC. And this is the main gateway of our VPC network we created. So this IP, basically this internet gateway contains a pool of IP addresses already provided by AWS, and this IP address will charge you hourly basis. Okay, and we ask this internet gateway to give us an IP, and now an IP is given by internet gateway on the back end. We have not asked directly to the internet gateway, but in fact this IP is routing all the traffic to the internet gateway. So this IP is allocated, but this IP is not associated so far with any instance that we want to access. And here you should know the concept of patting, the port address translation. Okay, so this IP will get the traffic from internet and will route the specific port whatever we will define in the port address translation rule. Okay, so here you can see this IP I will select in the action associate elastic IP. So where I want to associate, I want to associate to the instance. I can directly select the network interface too, but it's better to use the instance because at the end the instance will also associate this IP with some network interface. So which network interface? Only I have one instance running, and this is the private IP. So what it will do, we are going to set up some port address translation from this public IP to this private IP. So that's why you should have a good idea about port address translation. So now I am going to associate this. Okay, but this, what type of port address translation it will do? Who will decide this? This IP is allocated. And now if we go to instance, just like the instance in the networking part, just refresh this. So here you can see this public IP is associated. Now, what ports we want to route reach from this public IP to this machine? So initially, definitely I want to do an SSH base access, so that later on I will set up some services on the Linux machine by using some uh, putty type of tool. So here if we go in the security, the security group come in action, and security group is just like a firewall and working as a port address translator. So in this security group, you can see there are two rules. There is inbound rule and there is outbound rule. Whatever this small firewall is going to allow to reach inside this machine and going outside this machine. By default, all the traffic from outside to any IP is reachable. This 000 mean any IP. All the protocols, all the port range are reachable if this machine will hit any request to its gateway. And uh, this inbound rule only contains port 22 from any IP. Any public IP from the internet can hit to this public IP on port 22, and it will land the traffic directly straightforward in our virtual instance that has a local IP 20.20.20.7. Now this rule is by default available. So now what I will do, straightforward, I have to go to this virtual instance. Just need to copy this IP, and I will open the mobile term I am using to make an SSH access. Okay, now my mobile term is open. So I will go to session, new session, SSH, the public IP what I copied from the instance settings, and the username Ubuntu, and this username. How you will know this username? If you forget about the username, whatever you provision, you can go to this machine instance and you can click on the connect, and here it will give you the information about your EC2 instance, whatever you use the operating system. Here you can see the default user is Ubuntu. Okay, there are some other information I will show you, but from here you can get the username. Username I typed, then in the advanced SSH settings, use private key. And when I create that private key, whatever the key pair, the private key in the PPK format is downloaded on my machine. I am going to select this private, this PPK file. Public key is already published in our Linux machine. And now this public and private key authenticate each other, and we are able to land in our instance that is running on our AWS cloud in one of the zone, availability zone with the public subnet. So now here you can see the machine is ready, but we cannot see the public IP on this machine. We can only see the private IP. It's mean some router has this IP, and port address translation did our all the access to reach to this machine. So that magic is done by the security group. So now we are able to reach to this machine. If we try to ping any internet access, you can see the internet is working. Okay, so our machine is up. Now we can set up any service on this machine, just like for example, I want to set up, I will first of all jump into as a root user, and for example, I am going to create apt update. This is Ubuntu machine, and I will install an Nginx server, and we'll quickly show you how you can do another port forwarding to this machine by using the security group. So apt install Nginx. Nginx is installed. I'm not going to change any configuration related setting of Nginx. Simply I will start Nginx. Nginx, you know, is a web server, and stat command I believe not available. Apt install NAT tools will give you the netstat command that will help us to identify the ports open on this machine. So you can see the port 80 is opened with Nginx process. Okay, great. Now our machine is listening on port 80. But if I type this public IP in the browser, the public IP whatever I used to reach this machine, this public IP, I type in the browser with HTTP request, it will not work because we just made a port address translation by using the security group to reach to this machine by this public IP associated. So what we need to do, we have to select this instance, and we will go in the security section. In the security group, it is loading the security group. Select the security group associated with this instance, and there are outbound rules, there are inbound rules. We just want to add a new rule to reach to this machine. So I will add a rule. I can use custom port, or by default some standard ports are already there. So just like I just enable port 80, you can see TCP port 80. Otherwise, if you are using some custom port, you can use your own custom port too. And from which IP this should be reachable from anywhere. This source mean from anywhere. IPv4 based addresses can reach to this instance. So if I want to allow for some specific users, I can define their public IP. So this rule is added. Now I will just refresh this page. So you can see this page is reachable because now when I hit HTTP request on port 80, to this URL, it goes to this public IP on Amazon VPC, and that is forwarded to inside our running virtual machine. So I hope you got this idea. So what we did so far, we just created the network switches, VPC, EC2 instance. We did add some rule in the security group. We ran a service in the EC2, and we send the request from internet to this internet gateway to the public IP, and that is mapped with this EC2 instance in the public subnet. So in the next session, next video, we will discuss what is the difference in between public and private subnet in detail, and what are the concepts of NAT gateways, and how the network ACL does work.